joined us. It's the top story all over the news. I'm sure you've seen it, that Wikileaks has released 92,000 plus documents, mainly dealing with the Afghan war and what they say are massacres. And what I noticed immediately is much of what's in these documents, we haven't had time to go through them all. Most of them haven't been released. They've been given to the mainstream media, which makes me question things. I don't know what's really happening here. WikiLeaks released an Army document a few years ago where they train captains and above how to stage terror attacks and black ops. They've released a lot of good stuff. But I know that people I respect like John Young have had some questions. Madsen goes even further. He's joining us coming up in about 25 minutes to give us his take on what's happening, both with these new documents and what he thinks of WikiLeaks. It's also been pointed out and by callers, and it is in the New York Times today, that these documents point to the Army believing that Pakistan is protecting and working with the Taliban. Well, our own government, I put up the MSNBC article. It's in my film Road to Tyranny I put out 8 years ago, or 3 or 4 months after 9/11, more than 8 years ago, where they flew 6,000 Taliban and al-Qaeda leaders out to safety. It was basically a staged war. And we know the CIA created the Taliban and al-Qaeda. We know the CIA admitted a month ago they created fake bin Laden videos. So I don't know what to think of this, and it'll take time to really burrow down into it. But joining us is John Young, kind of the proto-WikiLeaks, that's been around for more than a decade and was one of the guys that helped found with the Electronic Frontiers Foundation and many other organizations. So we know John's a good guy. And John, give us your take on this big story.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that we don't know if these files, and they are digital files, these are not documents, these are not paper documents, they're only digital files. We don't know if they're authentic or not. What we have 3 versions in major newspapers and 1 version on WikiLeaks, and these are only digital versions. And apparently the files are made in the field on computers and sent in to headquarters. And the problem, and so I'll just say is, first of all, when they say it's the biggest dump of military documents, these are not documents, these are digital files. And the reason I emphasize that is that digital files are notoriously easy to manipulate, forge, change, and doctor. And so, and none of these 3 newspaper sites or WikiLeaks provides the original files. They only provide doctored and packaged versions. And so WikiLeaks has been known to put up original documents, as does my site. But these are not original documents, and they're only digital files. So that has not been pointed out, how easy it is to manipulate digital files. And many of the world's intelligence services are dumping huge amounts of digital files onto the Internet right now. And so we don't know for sure whether this is a major revelation or not, or WikiLeaks has been snookered, or if these newspapers have been snookered, and it hasn't been talked about, actually. Now, I say this because WikiLeaks in the past has used digital signatures on every one of their documents to prove authentication. This is the first time they've not done that. So none of these files are digitally authenticated by WikiLeaks, and we find that curious. We also find it curious that for the first time, WikiLeaks released documents to major media before they released it to the public. They've never done that before. They've always opposed that approach. So we don't know what this means, actually, whether this is an orchestrated dump of documents, how they were able to get these major newspapers who are normally extremely skeptical of WikiLeaks to join this campaign. And so there are many answers yet to be answered about whether this is a legitimate release of information or not. So we don't have the original files. We don't know why they cooked up this deal with these major newspapers who typically don't work together like this. And there you have it.
Well, I think you've crystallized it well there. And I had noticed that they'd always had digital signatures before. I had noticed that they'd always given it to the public first. And so a lot of things are changing. And I noticed the last few months, the media normally tries to ignore what WikiLeaks is doing. They've hyped and hyped to pique our interest this data dump that now took place. And we've seen Karl Rove and others famously inject fake documents, say, into George W. Bush's Texas National Air Guard record as a way to try to poison the well to discredit future documents that come out. But we saw them indict the Army officer that gave WikiLeaks the video of the Apaches shooting the kids and the Reuters reporters. So I agree with you that this whole thing needs to be examined, and we don't know what's really happening, but this is unorthodox for WikiLeaks.
It is. And so I'd like to hear Wayne's view on this. He's an expert in this kind of thing. So disinformation is big business right now in digital form because it's so easy to do. And that I'm surprised that WikiLeaks didn't account for itself more. And my suspicion is they needed the cover of these major newspapers for this data, that they didn't have the confidence to go out on its own as it usually does. So they've somehow managed to induce these major newspapers to play this role. And I'm saying, well, that's rather shrewd. That's pretty good, because it's actually not easy to snooker these people. And by the way, one of the things that happens, once you get this kind of coverage in major newspapers, it's very hard to go back and get people to look at the original documents, which are tedious, hard to read, takes forever. So the newspaper version starts to prevail, and it gets a life of its own. Now, we know this has happened several times in connection with the Obama administration, where a news report has taken on a life of its own, and it's very hard to correct it. And so we're very surprised that for example, the White House has issued this statement by General Jones. However, DOD has issued no statement, says we're studying the documents. We have no statement to make. So they don't know if they're legitimate or not, because of course, one of the things that they've done, they've initiated disinformation campaigns using cyber world. They have a whole new command to do that, and so they know they're pumping out false information themselves. And so one of the things that's now starting to happen in cyber world is something called blowback, where your own attacks come back to haunt you. And we know that they've been going after Pakistan with disinformation campaigns. And so we would like to see what they're going to do. Now, notice that Pakistan and Afghanistan are saying, what's going on here? And so they're suspicious that this is an actually orchestrated campaign. I don't want to add fire to the attacks on WikiLeaks. We happen to think that they're doing their best, but we also know that governments are immensely resourceful and using all sorts of outlets to get their message out.
Well, I did notice that the New York Times is able to cherry pick from the 92,000 documents and say, oh, look, there's evidence in these that Pakistan is helping the Taliban right as the news is announced that U.S. forces, special forces, are on the ground. Just a few months ago, the Pentagon lied and said, we have no forces in Pakistan. Now we know they're lying about that if these documents are authentic, and so it's pointing the finger at Pakistan.
Yep, and as you know, that's a long-running campaign right now. Listen, it's all fair. This is what war is about. You mount these disinformation campaigns as part of your on-the-ground campaigns. And the Internet is a favorite way to do this these days. That's why we've grown a little bit cautious about stuff we receive. There's so much of this phony information going out in digital form.
Well, I mean, here's an example. Here's an example. When I got the MIAC report from a police officer, and then from another federal officer, I got a Homeland Security report, I called the phone numbers on it. And I did data searches and found out that that was an FBI office I was about to call. I called. The person said, who gave this to you? Let me put you to my superior. And I kind of flummoxed them, and they said, yeah, that's real. You're not supposed to have that. And plus, I'd already seen previous documents they'd put out that had been released and declassified in decades before. And I knew it was ADL, Southern Poverty Law Center. I could even search whole paragraphs and find it in ADL, Southern Poverty Law Center reports. So I went on air and I said it was real, and they later came out and had a congressional investigation. They had a State House investigation and confirmed they were real. But so many documents I get, I just say, delete that out of the inbox. There's no way to find the provenance of that. And again, I don't have a big crew, and I'm pretty much the only person I trust, because my butt's on the line to be able to go forward with stuff. So most stuff I've been sent goes right in the shredder or gets deleted just because, absolutely. Because most of the stuff I get sent is disinfo. Yep.
Well, your term provenance is a good one because, in many fields, this is crucial to figure out whether something's fraudulent or not, is to have a traceable provenance. And in digital world, this is extremely difficult to do. But it turns out, Alex, you probably know, and Wayne can talk more about this, there are tactical means to trace a digital document below what most people have access to. There are spurs and clues unless it's very thoroughly sanitized by professionals. And
in fact, all computers put secret codes in the text. Printers put secret code in the text. And then every time the computer makers and printer makers get caught, they go, oh, it's an accident. But no, I mean, they've got a data stream in all of this.
Well, here's one of the technical things, and I'm not an expert, is that everything that goes over the Internet, as you know, is broken into packets and then reassembled. An expert can trace those packets backward, because that's how the system is able to reassemble the packets. And it's a well-known spy technique to trace through this packet route, not the entire file, but the packets contain the code for their reassembly at the receiving end. So unless you sanitize it very carefully, if something's going over the Internet, an expert can go right back to the